Alrighty then, welcome to dentReviews. Tonight, I want to know if you've ever heard an earphone that really nails the Harman target, or have you ever heard an earphone with 9 drivers? Well, stick around because we're going to review the IO Audio Volare. Now let's get right into it and look at this bad boy. Check this out. This is a plastic acrylic shell, semi-custom molded shape. It's very nice. This has a very nice paint job, as I call it. It's got a sort of metallic gray finish to it. It glimmers in the light. I love it. It's beautiful. Beautiful. Similar to the IO Sogno, which has a very similar paint job, but a slightly different faceplate. As you can see there, it's kind of a teardrop-shaped faceplate. Keep in mind, this is not the cable that came with this, so ignore that. But it is a 2-pin cable, and it has a couple bore holes here for the acoustic channels, and this ear tip, I have no idea where it came from, but it works really well for me. It's sort of a medium wide bore diameter and a narrow ear tip, and it allows me to get a nice deep easy seal. You can see it says Volaire right there on the IEM. Yeah, so anyway, it's nice, it's good, I like it. How does it fit? How does it feel? Well, again, it's lightweight, so it actually makes for a very comfortable fit. I'll see if you can see this on the camera here. There's no hot spots on my ear. It's super lightweight. It's very nice. I can listen to this thing for hours on end, which I have many times, and I've had no problem whatsoever. Now, this is a 9-driver IEM. So it's a driver for the bass, 4 balanced armature drivers for the mids and lower treble, and 4 EST drivers for the upper treble. That's a lot of drivers in there. And $600 price point, kind of high, medium-high tier IEM pricing. Comes with a cable that has interchangeable connectors, so you can do a 3.5, 4.4, etc. Comes with a carrying case, tips, all that kind of standard stuff. It's a very well-made IEM. It feels nice. It's not very heavy because of that plastic resin design. I think it's probably pretty durable. It's comfortable, and that's it. So, as always, the thing I care about the most is how does it sound? Well, let's jump right in here and take a look at the graphs. So I have a couple graphs pulled up here already, but let me actually just hide these real quick because I'm super unprepared and I have no idea what I'm doing, so I don't know why you're even at my channel. So we are going to look at the Harman target because, as I said, this is a phenomenal Harman tuning. If you look at the overall tonal balance, you're going to see that it is a very, very close approximation to Harman. This is the 2019 Harman target. Now, I've used this target because it's been out for a long time and it's a pretty widely known target, and they have adapted a newer target. They've made a refinement to it, but I haven't really delved into that too much, and I think this is a pretty good approximation of what earphones have been kind of aiming towards for a long time when they claim that they're Harman. So the bass, mids, and treble are very, very smooth, and their relative volumes are very, very close to the approximate Harman target here. You'll see there's no major dips or peaks, which is awesome. There is a slight resonant peak here, which you'll see on pretty much any earphone, and that can change based on insertion depth and tips diameter, all the kind of acoustic things that vary the resonant peak. Way up here, there's excellent treble extension, which, granted, you may not be able to completely trust measurements up here. We've talked about this before, but I do hear excellent treble extension with this earphone. So, phenomenally smooth frequency response. But is it perfect? No. There's a little bit of extra mid-bass here at the 200 hertz area, and there's a little bit of deviation in the treble here and here, maybe a decibel or two. And then, you know, how critically perfectly smooth is this in actuality compared to measurements? I don't know. I'd say this sounds pretty close to what I perceive the sound to be. So, no, it's not perfect, but if you compare a lot of the earphones that people claim are Harman, I think this is actually a much better representation than most of them. I've seen a lot of people claim, hey, listen to this Harman IEM, listen to that Harman IEM. And what actually you find is a lot of them have some stark deviations in places that really make it not sound Harman at all. For instance, you might have a similar shape to the Harman target as they claim, but then you'll see there's 5 extra decibels at 300 hertz. So there's much more bass warmth, or there's a huge boost in the really high treble, or maybe it's overall Harman-ish, but the lower treble is really subdued, or whatever. And I think that does a real disservice to the Harman target. I'm not going to say I think the Harman target is perfect. I don't. However, I really do think that if people heard IEMs that were actually tuned very close to the Harman target, they'd be surprised, and they probably would like them more than they think they would based on what's been said about the Harman target. So anyhow, that's the Harman target. Now, what I've done in my target here, I'll bring up on the graph, you'll see that mine is Harman-ish, but I sort of have lessened the Harman depth of the curve a little bit. So you'll see I have a little bit more mids, I have a little bit less bass overall, and I have a little bit smoother treble response. But even my target, I think I need to update soon because there's a little bit of a problem in the lower treble. Over the years, I really find that, honestly, the etymotic target is by far, in my opinion, the most accurate speaker-like frequency response for an IEM in terms of treble. And when I say treble, I'm referring to everything above, say, 1,000 hertz, 1 kilohertz. And you can see it's a little bit deviant from my target in the sense that it's boosted at 2 to 3 kilohertz a little bit. Bass-wise, I think my target is much better than etymotic. I think etymotic is very lacking in the bass. So if you look here, all I really need to do to my target, and I plan on doing this at some point, is add a little bit of that etymotic treble presence there. That diffuse field treble with a bass boost is essentially what my target is. Harman target obviously has a similar shape, but it just overdoes the bass and overdoes the treble just a little bit. So what you have compared to my target is, again, like Harman, it's a little bit extra in the 100 to 200 hertz. That gives the sound a little bit more of a relaxed, warm bass quality to it. But I do think that this has a very, very high quality physical, like speaker-like bass for an earphone. It's very good. The mids are a little bit lower, maybe a decibel or so in this width here, which has more of a perception than it might look like on the graph. And it gives it a little bit more of a sucked out, hollow quality to some aspects, such as vocals even, especially without that etymotic treble area. That really takes a vocal and kind of sets it back in the mix a little bit. And then lastly, the upper treble. It's hard to gauge based on the graph, but in my opinion, I think the overall highest treble area just needs to come down a slight amount, just a tiny, tiny bit. And just to give you a comparison here, I'm going to bring its sibling, its brother IEM, the IO Audio Sogno. And what you have here is a very similar frequency response, very, very close. But you'll notice it's a little bit more of a scooped out shape in the lower mids, upper bass, a little bit more of the etymotic treble, and then a little bit more subdued treble above, say, 8K. It actually looks like, in my opinion, they're probably using the same overall treble, but maybe they added a driver or an RC filter or something here to give that little boost in the upper treble extension. But, as I said, I think the Sogno, I think the Volaire is a little bit excessive up there, but the Sogno is probably a little bit subdued. So really, and I hate when this happens, but I really think the best upper treble in an IEM would be a sort of average of these two in terms of its amplitude. The shape on both of them is very good, and they sound very clean. There's no obvious peaks or dips. There's no rough edges. But just, man, averaging those out would be so perfect. I think the treble in the Sogno is a little more etymotic-like, which I prefer, and I think sounds a little bit more tonally accurate. This mid area for both of them is a little bit interesting because on the Sogno, so scooped out in the area that I actually like for the bass response. In other words, the bass from 0 to 100 hertz gives a little bit more of a tactile firmness because it doesn't bleed into the 1 to 300 hertz area. However, I think both of these might be a little subdued in the lower treble mid area here, maybe from like, say, 5 to 1,000 hertz. And a good example of that would be something like the Moondrop Aqua. I think the Aqua has a very nice mid presence there, and you'll see it's more elevated. So I think the Aqua has a phenomenal midsection in terms of its quality, but the Aqua has a little bit less refined treble, even though I think the Aqua treble is very good, very high quality, very revealing. It has a little bit more softness way up high, and a little bit different shape here, this kind of carved out shape that simultaneously can make the treble sound more relaxed and more defined in some ways, but I would say critically speaking is probably not as accurate. And then the Aqua bass, I've seen two different samples of this earphone, the Aqua, and one had a little bit more bass, sort of like the Volaire, but I do like the Aqua bass shape a little bit better, how it's sub-bass oriented, and I like that tilt a little bit more. But for some reason, the perception of the bass on the Aqua is a little bit softer. It has a little bit less of a tactile firmness to it. In that regard, I think the Sogno is the best, with the Volaire coming in the second best. So that's kind of the overview of the frequency response. I think that it's a very, very good frequency response. There's nothing objectionable about it. It's objectionable about the frequency response. It's very smooth, very linear. Overall tonal balance is good, but it does lean a little bit towards that Harman bass response and Harman shape. Is that a good thing? Well, I guess that's up to you whether you have that preference or not. In my opinion, It's a little bit too maybe V-shaped, if that's what you want to call it. I think a good way to talk about it would be giving you some song examples and comparisons to the other earphones that I mentioned. So let's start with a song like Break for Lovers by Men I Trust, which is one I like to go to a lot because it's got a very nice sort of high fidelity mix to it. A lot of small, like audio candy kind of sound effects, guitars and drums and things that kind of fill in all around the mix, the stereo width and everything. And it has a nice firm tactile bass response, and it's got a nice amount of dynamic transients. It has a lot of ear candy, and just the mix is superb. Her vocal has a very nice ethereal quality to it, and it kind of floats in this cloud. It's great. I love it. With the Volare, it sounds very nice. The bass is firm, maybe a little bit on the thicker, heavier side. The treble and the upper mids, lower treble have that sound characteristic I described as being a little bit recessed. And what that does in this song is it pushes her vocal a little bit farther back in the mix. So what you end up with is kind of a little veil or a little bit of distance put between you and the vocal, whereas something on like the Aqua or the Sogno, the vocal sounds a little bit closer to you and a little bit more appropriately level in the mix with the other instruments. But the Volaire really brings out the smallest details. So all those little guitars and percussive elements in the stereo width, the far left and right, just really have a nice clarity and a nice precise imaging to them, which I like a lot. But like I said, that kind of comes down to it being maybe slightly V-shaped, a little bit, just tiny bit in that mid region. The treble is always going to bring out the details. The bass is always going to have a nice fullness, but it lacks the lush mids that I want to hear, which something like the Aqua does really well at. So on this song with the Aqua, those hard left and right panned elements don't sound as crisp in like the most fine detail sense, but they do sound precise and they sound nice, but things jump out at you a little bit more because all of those instruments have a little bit more mid presence in the body of the instrument. So you feel like the fullness of them. Even a small instrument like a tiny guitar sound, there's still a little bit more fullness in the mids of that guitar, which makes it sound a little bit more full-bodied and a little bit more jumping out in the mix. The vocal just sounds a little bit more ethereal, properly sitting in the mix. Nice reverberant quality still. So it really comes down to, do you value the clarity and ultra-high resolution upper treble, or do you value the overall tonal balance that allows all the instruments to sit a little bit more critically level with each other in the mix? The Sogno and the Aqua are going to give you a little bit more of that critical linearity in terms of an engineering perspective. Some people may find that boring. Maybe you find the Volaire a little bit more energetic, a little bit more crispy up top and bassy down low, and that just gives you a little bit of that hype that you like. There's nothing wrong with that. And it's very, very linear in reference in its overall balance. It's just a little bit of a deviation there that gives it a little bit of a lean towards V-shape, a little bit of a lean towards detail and bass dominance rather than lush, clean midsection. One other example would be BT. So a song across wires, the song Tomahawk, has a nice deep sub bass. On the Volaire, that sub bass comes in really dominant. It's not bad, and again, compared to most earphones, it's not really hyper bass, but it does have a very round and full sub bass that, while it sounds good, it sounds a little bit too much for my opinion in the mix, whereas the Sogno and the Aqua have a little bit more of a neutral bass so that the sub bass hits deep and low and tactilely, but it doesn't push through the mix too much. The weight of the bass sounds a little bit more appropriate. Also with the song Tomahawk, the Aqua specifically in the Sogno, but more specifically the Aqua, it's relaxed, but all the elements have a nice fullness to them. So the vocal, the synth elements, they all kind of have a forwardness that allows you to hear them easily, whereas on the Volaire, some instruments have an incredible sense of clarity and depth and spaciousness, but some other instruments actually feel like you have to kind of carefully listen to hear them because of that characteristic where they're kind of pushed back in the mix because of those subdued mids. And it makes some things sound a little bit less present in the mix, which doesn't sound bad and relatively speaking isn't drastic. But in my opinion, when I switched back to the Aqua, sure, sometimes I crave that really fine detail, but for the most part, I value that mid presence more. And also, when you're talking about music in general, some mixing engineers would argue that 90% of the sound of a song resides in that sort of lower mid to upper mid region. So you have most of the sound, you could completely clip off the sub bass and the high treble, and the sound would still be good. It might not sound super high def, but it would sound good and well mixed and balanced, and it would sound good on a lot of different speakers. Whereas if you were to take away even just the center of the mids, a few hundred hertz here and there, and keep everything else, it would sound obviously wrong and it would not sound correct. So in that regard, while it's relatively a small change, I do believe that the mids on something like the Sogno and the Volare, the Sogno and the Aqua, are just more truly representative of what I would consider a reference tuning. So the Volare is if you want something laid back with some good full-bodied bass while being still fairly physical, some really high extension and high detail, while still being relatively reference, it's your IEM. And if that's what you're going for, I think the price is, medium-high price IEM. It's not cheap, but it might be worth it. If you want to save a couple $100, $400 and get the Sogno, I think you'll get a slightly more reference overall tonal balance, but you will lose a little bit of that super high fine detail retrieval. And if you want to go even less, you can go $350 for the Aqua, although unfortunately it's not available in the Americas right now. It's only Japan, which hopefully they've changed that. But if, say, you happen to come upon that for $350, I think that that's a very good, slightly easier, more relaxed listen than the Sogno is, but while being very similar in its overall tonal characteristics in terms of it being very balanced and smooth and reference and everything. They just have a slight different shape, whereas the Sogno is a little bit more maybe bass focused with a firmer bass, and the Aqua is a little bit more maybe mid focused with a more lush midsection. And I think that those are kind of the overall characteristic differences between these. So would I recommend the Volaire? Yeah, I think it's an excellent IEM. And honestly, even at the price point, I think is very good. I think the flawless frequency response in terms of no peaks or dips, I mean, it's very smooth. It has an excellent, refined, smooth, clean response. Is it the perfect shape? No. Is it close? Maybe. Again, some of that's subjective. What are you looking for? Are you looking for a Harman or maybe dentReviews style sound? It's not that far off and it's very smooth. I would highly recommend it. Are you looking for something maybe leaner? Do you look towards something that has a more diffuse feel, more edemotic style? Okay, maybe this isn't for you. But hopefully going through all these examples and these frequency response discussions, you can gauge based on other reviews that I've talked about, other earphones, maybe this is something that seems like it's up your alley. And if it is, hey, I say go for it. If not, hopefully you see some of these other options I've given you and maybe they'll work a little bit better for you. So I'll leave it there. If you have any questions, as always, leave them below. And I did want to pose a question to you. If you've seen this video this far in, I'm impressed, but I thought about adding a little bit of versatility to my channel by adding some lens and camera review type videos and maybe some photography type videos. They're not going to overtake my audio. I'll still do a lot of audio, but that's something I thought about. I figure a lot of people have that sort of crossover interest with, audio and video and photos and things like that. So let me know if you think that's a good idea or not in the comments, and I'll see if that might be something I might do in the future. But as always, I thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll catch you later.